This week on Government Matters.
As a biologist, I'm always thinking of how you can protect animals.
Government agencies turn to apps to advance their missions.
I definitely see this as a tremendous opportunity across the chain.
Will open data spark the next tech boom? We ask former U.S. CTO Anish Chopra.
In the military, there's the expression of more tooth and less tail. And nearly everybody agrees that tail has gotten way too big.
Congressman Mac Thornberry tackles procurement at the DOD. Government Matters starts right now.
From ABC 7 and News Channel 8, this is Government Matters.
Thanks for joining us. Government is the engine that runs this city. That's why Government Matters. Every Sunday we'll bring you the week's top headlines in tech, security, and management. I'm your host, Morris Jones. We open this Sunday with headlines from Capitol Hill. IT procurement has been front and center since the troubled launch of healthcare.gov. FATARA, the Federal IT Acquisition Reform Act, is one possible fix. Now, parts of that bill are under consideration in the Senate. FCW reports some lawmakers want to include it in the defense package. Meanwhile, the House has passed the Data Act. That bill would require federal agencies to code spending data in a uniform way and make it more transparent. NextGov reports companion legislation awaits a full vote in the Senate. Homeland Security nominee Jay Johnson finds himself in a similar position. A Senate committee approved his nomination this week. Now he's headed for a full Senate vote. For 2 days this week, the Ronald Reagan Building in downtown D.C. hosted hundreds of government and private sector IT professionals. NextGov Prime covered topics like cloud security, agile software, and what we report on here, apps that advance missions. Hatsavella has more.
An app developed to save right whales called Whale Alert. It takes information from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and places it on a nautical chart so a ship can see it.
As a biologist, I'm always thinking of how you can protect animals.
And because of that passion, Dr. David Wiley was given a NextGov Bold Award. The award recognizes federal employees who have implemented innovative programs that make government more effective. A research coordinator at NOAA, Wiley and his team came up with a mobile app, the first for marine conservation.
The shippers really were interested in trying to find ways to protect whales, and changing their behavior then required really them to understand why and how.
Dr. Wiley says the app helps do that. Time here is key because he says there are only 500 right whales in the world. Ship strikes is what kills most of them. Dr. Wiley says the same concept can be used in the West Coast or across the world. When it comes to apps, NASA is taking it out of this world. Ali Llewellyn is project manager of a large-scale collaboration called International Space Apps Challenge. It's a way for NASA to seek skills from people around the world with the hopes of improving life on Earth and space. 83 different cities participated in the challenge. One group came up with innovative ways to dispose of all kinds of waste in orbit and other planets.
You might be an engineer or a software developer. You might be a maker or a teacher. We're going to give you some challenges that you can come around, challenges that are meaningful so that you can be a part of exploration.
Llewellyn says apps have changed the way we solve problems and possibly how our democracy works.
It used to be that to be a citizen, you could vote, right? You could protest, you could write your congressman, and all those things are great. But now we're offering citizens opportunities not just to do those things, to be involved in the work of government, but we're offering them opportunities to contribute their skills, their technology, their perspective, their voice into specifically the way we solve problems. And I think that that applies to any need and any function of government.
They have become tools that by using data helps us live better lives and improve the world we live in. In Washington, Hatsavella for Government Matters.
The Office of Management and Budget wants agencies to move to a dynamic and proactive cybersecurity approach by 2017. It's called Information Security Continuous Monitoring, or ISCM. Federal News Radio reports ISCM will be phased in by working closely with the Department of Homeland Security. OMB wants each agency to turn in their plan by the end of February. Yahoo will expand its efforts to protect user data. The company plans to encrypt all communications and other information flowing into Yahoo data centers around the world. CEO Marissa Mayer made the announcement on Monday. It followed a report by the Washington Post that the National Security Agency hacked Yahoo and Google communication lines. Meyer and other female CEOs have had an impact on the long-standing perception that tech is a boys' club. New numbers suggest women are gaining ground in the tech workplace, as Zane Asher reports.
Big changes in the technology world. A growing number of women are getting hired. In the past year, the tech industry has brought on 60,000 new workers and 36,000 are women. That's about 60%. Certainly a huge shift. In the past year, men have traditionally made up 70 to 80% of new hires in tech. These women join Marissa Mayer, CEO of Yahoo, Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook, Ginny Rometty, CEO of IBM, and Meg Whitman, the head of HP. But is it a trend? Analysts say it's too soon to tell, but the tides have been turning largely because of those notable hires, and most recently, Marissa Mayer. Those executives are raising awareness about the lack of women in tech, and many companies are working to bring in more diversity. But there's still work to be done. After all, men make up the bulk of the workforce in the technology sector, about 2/3 of all employees. And we don't know exactly which types of jobs these female hires are getting, administrative or engineering. I'm Zane Asher in New York.
We'll turn from headlines to tech straight ahead on Government Matters. Open data could engineer a tech startup revolution. But who will reap the benefits, business or consumers? Former U.S. CTO Anish Chopra joins me next. In Tech Matters, the value of open data. This month, the Obama administration announced new partnerships with private companies, nonprofits, and academics. The White House wants groups like Amazon Web Services and Google Earth to solve some of our nation's biggest problems. Will it work? And will private companies be able to cash in? Joining me now for some answers on Government Matters is Anish Chopra. He's a former U.S. Chief Technology Officer and co-founder of Hunch Analytics. Mr. Chopra is also a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress and a member of Virginia Governor-elect Terry McAuliffe's transition team. You're one busy guy. Anish, let's start with some background. You left the White House in February of 2012. 1 month later, President Obama announced $200 million in big data initiatives. Talk about that program as you understand it.
Well, it's a real important milestone in our country's capacity to harvest the value of this ever-increasing supply of information. The $200 million Big Data Initiative is a research and development program designed to help improve the tools that are available for analysts and for frontline workers to make sense of this growing supply of data in all its forms. The president also challenged the agencies to apply big data analytics to solve some of the nation's biggest challenges.
Last week, Phase 2, the Obama administration announced a series of open data partnerships. How will those relationships work and why are they important?
Well, one more positive step in the direction of taking steps to make the most value available for the data that's been released. I'll share with you an example. A bunch of pharmaceutical firms have joined forces with the National Institutes of Health to make access to clinical trials more available to patients who need them most by taking full advantage of the data that's available, both patients who wish to voluntarily participate with their data to see if they can qualify for a clinical trial, and the information about those trials so that that matchmaking service can happen more effectively.
Now, Anish, let's talk about the business value of open data. Last month, McKinsey & Company released an extensive report on open data. They estimated the economic value of open data at $3 trillion a year. That's a lot of potential. For federal contractors, is this the next tech boom?
I definitely see this as a tremendous opportunity across the chain. There are going to be tech firms that are going to be in the business of helping government agencies to supply data. There are going to be tech firms benefiting to help create tools to analyze that data. And there'll be a growing number of companies locally and across the United States who will make economic value by analyzing and applying that data in specific areas of the economy where that information is needed most.
The McKinsey report also finds consumers will reap most of the benefits of open data because of improved transparency into price and product information. Tom Lee at the Sunlight Foundation picked up on that point. Here's a quote. That's not to say that open data startups aren't important or potentially lucrative, but the wealth they generate directly is likely to be relatively small compared to better governance, more efficient markets, and smarter business decisions. What do you make of that point?
Well, it's an important topic, but I suggest to him that it depends on the conditions of the sector of the economy in question. In healthcare, as our industry moves towards paying for outcomes and improvements in quality, what you're going to find is a new market opportunity for the next billion-dollar business who will analyze data to help patients and doctors make better decisions. So it's true to the betterment of patients, but if I can help supply that information to make those better decisions, I'll benefit economically from that transition.
Great having you with us on Government Matters. Anish Chopra, thanks.
Thanks for having me.
We'll turn from tech to security, straight ahead on Government Matters. Lawmakers say the Department of Defense has a procurement problem. Is overregulation leaving our troops underprepared? I sit down with Congressman Mac Thornberry next. In security matters, procurement and the DoD. The process gets buried deeper and deeper in regulations every year. Now a bipartisan group of lawmakers wants to take a multi-year line-by-line approach and cut through the muck. I sat down with the man in charge, Congressman Mac Thornberry. When you spoke about this effort at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, you mentioned a line-by-line approach. That's tough to do with an idea of what ultimately you hope to accomplish. What's your vision of the future for DoD procurement reform?
Well, the goal here is to help the taxpayers get more value out of the money they spend, and also to get needed equipment and weapons and services into the field faster. Because remember, when this system is so slow and so cumbersome, it has an effect on American lives and American security.
This sounds labor intensive. How long will it take?
Well, we have mapped out roughly a couple of years, but this is not a situation where we're going to do a study for 2 years and then come up with some several thousand-page bill at the end. We're going to look for how we can make progress as we go. Some of it may well be legislation, of course, but some of it won't be. Some of it's going to be the way we conduct oversight, the questions we ask, because it turns out that we can help shape Pentagon behavior and even the culture by the nature of the questions and when we ask them and how we ask them.
This is an unenviable task. Why did you undertake it in the first place? And how is this related to sequestration?
Well, I think sequestration just highlights the importance of getting more value out of the money that we spend on defense. So if sequestration goes away and all of the budget gets resolved in just the way I want them to, we're still not going to see big increases in the defense budget. And yet at the same time, the world is not getting any safer, the world's not getting any simpler. So we've got essentially unlimited security challenges and very limited resources to deal with them. So one of the things that tells me is we're going to have to get more defense out of the dollars we spend. And I think there is a sense among Republicans and Democrats, among lots of folks in the Pentagon, among everybody in private industry, that it has become critical. So there's an urgency now that we have not had before.
Now, last month, House Armed Services Committee Chairman Buck McKeon said this initiative will include a hard look at acquisition. Will it result in uniform regulations, or will they differ for weapons procurement and IT procurement? Because you can have tanks that nothing changes with them for years, but IT changes every year. How do you put everything under one umbrella?
Well, I don't know the answer, but it is absolutely true that one of the things that has changed is more and more of what the Pentagon buys is IT, it is high tech, where often the private sector is on the cutting edge, and it changes rapidly. That, of course, is the antithesis of the Pentagon procurement system. So it has been suggested maybe we need 2 different tiers or 2 different tracks for procurement. But there are other ideas. So we're going to listen, we focus on some of these problems, but also look at the existing regulations and how they encumber being able to get things purchased quickly, but also fielded quickly. You know, it doesn't do any good if we buy a bunch of it if we can't get it where it needs to be.
In October, you wrote an op-ed for Real Clear Defense blaming heavy federal regulations for driving up costs. How does that happen?
It happens over years, and it happens with the best of intentions. So if there is a cost overrun in a program, a lot of times the way Congress responds, the way the Pentagon responds, is to put new requirements or a new oversight office to make sure that never happens again. Well, if you build that up over years and years and decades, what you end up with is a very cumbersome system full of lots of specific requirements that make it nearly impossible to be as agile and responsive as we need to be.
Savvy defense contractors know how to navigate the system. Sometimes they underbid on acquisition contracts to win more lucrative maintenance contracts later on. If you limit regulations, won't they simply find new and easier ways to navigate to do the same thing?
Well, it is exactly true that one of the problems we have now is that there's a low bid, people underbid intentionally at the initial acquisition, knowing they can make their money in the maintenance or in the repair. And so part of what we have to do is look at the life cycle costs of something, not just the initial acquisition costs. You know, I think it is a fair point that the big defense contractors will always adjust to whatever the system dictates. But on the other hand, I think if we can have less rigid structures, so it's simpler, more transparency, but then accountability to go with it, I think we get a better result. That does not mean somebody won't abuse the system. They may, but we have to resist the urge to then come up with a new law because somebody abuses the system. You have to have the systems in place to catch it and to hold them accountable. So if somebody does abuse the system, they should not get another contract.
Ultimately, would fewer regulations result in fewer DoD employees?
Well, fewer DoD employees who are focused just on regulations. You know, in the military, there's the expression of more tooth and less tail. And nearly everybody agrees that tail has gotten way too big, and as it does, it robs from the biting power, if you will, of the tooth. So I don't know about fewer total people, but certainly more people who are out there doing things and fewer people who are checking the checkers who are checking the checkers. And that is the description I've heard in virtually every facility I've visited over the last few years.
Congressman Mac Thornberry. We'll turn from security to management straight ahead on Government Matters. Turning biometric data into decisions about terrorist screening has great value. But how do you put a dollar figure on it? The IBM Center for the Business of Government joins me next. In Management Matters, the transition from data to decisions. In March of 2012, President Obama announced a $200 million big data research and development initiative. Last week, he announced a partnership between the private sector and government that will use big data to solve big problems. For agencies, that's easier said than done. Joining me now to explain on Government Matters is John Cominsky, Senior Fellow at the IBM Center for the Business of Government. John, you just wrapped up a study with the Partnership for Public Service. It's called From Data to Decisions 3. I'd like to start with a passage from that study. I think it will set the tone for this discussion. A September report on big data adoption by IT consultancy Gartner found that while 64% of the organizations had invested or planned to invest in big data, 56% said they were struggling to wring value from it. That's a daunting figure. Why does President Obama want the federal government to tackle big data in the first place?
Well, this is something that the federal government has been doing for a number of years, actually, and the study is about how organizations that have been doing it for the past decade or 15 years or so have been approaching this.
Now, you write that sequestration compels programs to compete fiercely for scarce dollars and that agency leaders need to show a return on investment. That's a tall order for certain agencies. Take Defense Department biometrics, for example. How do you calculate the value of something like identifying enemy combatants?
Well, in that particular case, the Defense Department had been spending several millions of dollars to identify through biometrics potential terrorists in Iraq and Afghanistan. And what they have done is they have actually identified and developed a database of several million people where they've been able to parse out which ones have potentially dangerous traits. And they use those as a way of trying to prioritize their risk and target where they may need to pursue some follow-up.
Now, in your report, you mentioned collaboration and recommend agencies search for existing authorities that allow them to pay for help. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. In the case of the famine early warning system that is run by the U.S. Agency for International Development, they work together with NASA, they work together with the Department of Agriculture, the U.S. Geological Survey, to be able to develop data from many different sources to determine where famine might be occurring in countries such as, places such as Africa. And what they've done is they have shared data between them in order to be able to make this work. And by working collaboratively, they're able to reduce the collective costs.
Now, as we know, data doesn't always produce welcome results. It has a knack for finding the fat. Does that produce some resistance at the agency level?
Well, in some cases, there are presumptions as to why something may be happening. And again, in the case of the famine early warning system, there was research that they had produced that showed that a particular country in Africa was not, in fact, in fear of famine, as the people back in Washington thought. They were using data from satellites and from geological surveys and from on-the-ground people to determine that it was malnutrition, but not a famine.
It's a big story. We're going to see this for years to come, big data and everything that comes with it. John Cominsky, Senior Fellow at the IBM Center for the Business of Government. Thanks, John.
Thank you.
On Thursday, Washington recognized the achievements of some of the top innovators in federal IT, known as the FedScoop 50. FedScoop says hundreds of individuals and programs were nominated. 20,000 votes were cast. You've seen several of the winners on this program. Thanks for being with us. I'm Morris Jones. Your week is filled with other matters. Save Sundays for us.